CultivatED Marketer, episode 33, Change Communications with Lynn Zimmerman. In this episode of CultivatED Marketer, the three of us talk with change communications expert Lynn Zimmerman about going to where your audiences are at, the strategic function of communications and the role of communications, and this whole notion of communications versus change management and the role each play in affecting a change within an organization. So let's take a little bit and listen to our conversation with change communications expert Lynn Zimmerman. So as we lead in to this conversation that we had with change and internal communications professional and expert Lynn Zimmerman, Matt, Julie, what are your guys' takeaways? I know one of the things that I took from that discussion, and I could have spent easily another, and I'll probably talk to her about next week, quite honestly, for about an hour, is this whole notion of where she was talking about be where they are, be where they're at. And this whole notion about getting out and meeting people just authentically and organically. Matt and I, in past episodes, we've talked about that with one of the issues we've had, whether it be the pandemic or even undergraduates as they graduate and the decline of membership in member organizations. You heard from Lynn how important IABC was to her livelihood. And that was probably for me, the key takeaway. It just really reinforced things we've been talking about. And as I've been working, whether it's my son is a new professional, forcing him to get away from his PlayStation 5 and getting out and meeting people in a professional capacity, which thankfully I know right now he's in a meeting. I hear you, buddy. I know you're in Milwaukee meeting videographers all over the NBA. So I love you. I know you're doing it. But that was kind of my key takeaway was that. What was your guys' takeaway?
Be careful there, Dad. You never know who's listening.
That's right.
Yeah, this was such a great chat, Brent. I'm so glad we're going to be able to share it with listeners. And Lynn was the perfect guest in so many ways. A couple of things that struck me that she talked about was, and you guys will hear this, she talks so much about working within that change environment at big organizations, both with the change managers and also the communicators. And she's a very exceptional consultant in that space. But I'm glad she mentioned this because I was talking with a group about this a couple of weeks ago, the value of just a really strong stakeholder analysis and making sure that you're looking at stakeholders from a couple different lenses. What is their importance to the project versus what's their level of influence? I thought that was just a really important point and certainly one that I've seen pay off. And also, by the way, to have the communicators do that, it shouldn't just be the role of the project managers to do the stakeholder analysis. We've got communications priorities that we need to be thinking about. Ergo, we should be doing a lot of that stakeholder analysis. And then the other thing, just at the end, she threw this in. I'm sure people will catch it. We got into a short conversation about AI, which is kind of unusual these days to just have a short conversation on AI, but we did. And she's talked about how, as a solo practitioner, using AI is sort of a really good sounding board or office mate when you don't really, and I'm sure this would resonate with Julie because she's in this situation. Mm-hmm. You're not around a team all the time. So, and I'm even this way as somewhat of a kind of a solo crack role as an educator. And so to have that sounding board is really, really super valuable. So yeah, Lynn was great. And I think the listeners are really going to enjoy this.
Yeah, I thought it was really good. And, when I was leading comms in-house, what I would tell my team constantly, and I've said this a lot on LinkedIn, is that communications is a strategic function of an organization. So when she was talking about the decisions that an IT department might make for an entire corporation, you can't just let that team decide it. You need a communicator speaking into that because they're going to be thinking through the audience, how they're going to receive it. IT might be thinking about how they're going to use it. Communications is thinking strategically about how this is going to affect them and how to communicate that to get buy-in. So I thought that was really key. I don't care if you're doing change comms, internal comms, external comms, PR, whatever, you're a strategic function of an organization and you should operate as such.
Well said.
That anvil is the anvil we're going to leave this conversation on, Julie, Matt.
Right.
Yes, we are a strategic function, by golly, that likes, although you need to read Julie's post that's hitting LinkedIn about how we like to talk about it too much, apparently, though. But on the flip side of that, enough from us. Let's get into this conversation with change and internal communications expert, Lynn Zimmerman. Welcome to CultivatED Marketer, where we talk marketing professional development so your garden of opportunity grows. This is Brent Bowen.
I'm Matt Tidwell.
And I'm Julie Masson.
Julie's here with us for the first time. Yay. Alongside our guests. So yeah, you can't see the claps, people, but we're giving claps to Julie. So, but many times Julie will be with us. Our guest, unfortunately, although maybe we could add a fourth, maybe I could quit. Like Carmy on the Bear. Maybe I could quit the restaurant. But no, I don't think you guys will let me. Anyway, our guest is more than amazing and awesome. She has been in the field for 25 years, focusing largely on internal and change communication. She is the CEO and chief strategist for Swing Communication, where she creates strategies that help employees understand, not just understand, but commit to the work, commit to behavior change. The Venn diagram, speaking of LinkedIn stuff, she put out an awesome Venn diagram on LinkedIn that I know we'll talk about. And she demonstrates basically how you as an individual can contribute to your company's success. And not only is she an award-winning strategic communicator, she's been an active member at IBC and has received the accredited business communicator designation. I think we call that the ABC, right, folks? As well as the strategic communication management professional certification. And I can count her as a friend and classmate, undergraduate classmate, that she and I shared time together and capstone at the University of Kansas. I am so geeked to have Lynn Zimmerman on the show. Welcome to the show, Lynn.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So just so thrilled to have you on the show. The first question I want to ask you is we're all ready to get into change and internal comms and then your career journey is you've had a rich career that spanned marketing. You and I even spent time at Sprint and T-Mobile together, right?
Yes.
So you've spanned so many different things, done so many different things in your career. And other than Professor Guth, like what drew you to the field and how, since the early days of like you and me together, undergrad, capstone, how's your perspective in the field kind of evolved since then? What drew you in and how's it evolved?
Well, it's funny. I did not intend to ever go to journalism school. I wouldn't even have thought that that was part of my path, but I was really bad at the business school. Calculus almost killed me. And then
accounting and econ.
And then I was looking forward to, I was looking at statistics and another round of calculus. And I just knew that that was probably not the best path forward for me if I wanted to successfully graduate from college. And so I started talking to people and I knew I wanted to be in business and I knew I wanted to contribute in a big way to that business. And somebody that I was talking to was like, there's a program at the journalism school that you should really look into. And I'm sure I made a horrible face and said, ew. But then they talked about the business communication program at the University of Kansas. And so I started looking into it and it was actually exactly what I wanted to do. I had always thought PR or something in communications would be a role that I would enjoy. And so, yeah, I started looking in more closely and really found my place at the journalism school at the University of Kansas. And yeah, Professor Guth, Professor Marsh, some really good professors who showed me why this was the right path for me. It was, and so kind of a split-second decision turned into most of my life, getting me on that right path.
That's great. Lynn, thanks so much for being on the show. And you and I have known each other for a while now, and I know you have lots of ties back to our region. We talked about that, including your college experience. And in my role as a faculty member at KU, I still see Professor Guth, now Emeritus Professor Guth, from time to time. So I'll have to let him know that he got a shout out in this episode. I'm sure he'll love that and tune in. And you're in, just so people can orient, you're in Denver, Colorado now, right?
I'm in Fort Collins, Colorado.
You're in Fort Collins.
So just up north.
Okay. Yeah. Perfect.
But
perfect.
Lynn, can you also share where you've come from? Because we have a connection there.
So,
right?
I'm trying to remember. So
Iowa.
Yes. I originally, I've lived so many places. I grew up in Iowa. And my big rebellious phase in high school was to decide to go to the University of Kansas instead of going to Iowa State or Iowa. I thought I was getting far away. And again, good choice for me. But then I was moving south. So lived in Kansas City for a while and then lived in Oklahoma for a couple of years. And thankfully, instead of going to Houston or somewhere in Texas, I ended up in Denver and then made my way to Fort Collins. So
excellent. And I wanted to ask you specifically about a journey because I know Brent kind of covered a bit of this in your background, but you've been running Swing, your firm now, since 2012 and then went fully independent in 2018. What inspired you to kind of make that leap? I'd love to hear those stories.
Sure. So I was in the corporate world and I really thought my career path was going to be working my way up, getting promotion after promotion into more of a leadership role within a corporation. The idea of owning my own business, it was there, but it was never something that I thought I would actually pursue. And after my last company where I was the director of internal comms, we acquired more than 40 companies in I was there for 5 years. And so there were some weeks where we were acquiring 5 companies and I was tired. And so
tired just hearing you talk about it.
Because in addition to my day job, which was the normal internal comms for the company, I was responsible for the mergers and acquisitions communication, and the integration communication and the business transformation that came from the acquisitions. And so I was tired. That company grew from 2,500 employees to more than 6,000, and I did not grow a team during that time. And so one day I woke up and I said, I don't have to do this anymore. And so I quit and took some time off and did some different things to kind of figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up, but always kept my finger on the pulse of communications and the roles that I took while not being fully into comms still had a marketing spin to them or, using some of my creativity and my strategic thinking. And so eventually kind of found my way back into communications and started just dabbling with some friends that I had who had businesses, helping them out. And all of a sudden it's turned into a real business. And so, it's a winding road, and I'm lucky to have been able to take that time and figure out and find my way back into the work that I really love to do. But ultimately, I love being a consultant now. I can't imagine going back into the corporate world because I have more freedom to pick clients that I enjoy working with and the projects that I want to work on. And I've really learned to love this part, being a business owner and having more control over the work that I get to do.
And in your corporate realm, I just wanted to clarify, did you work both external communications and internal communications, or one or the other?
So I've done both. I started out my career in, this is a great story. I started out with a PR agency. I was doing PR for Sprint Yellow Pages. And so I'm super young and, that doesn't age me at all. And that was back in 96-ish timeframe. And so Yellow Pages were on its way out. And so I didn't have a great experience in PR because it was really hard to get people to be excited about Yellow Pages. And so from there, did a little bit of marketing, worked for an investment bank. And then like everybody in Kansas City, made my way to Sprint, where I did community relations for a couple of years. I was in charge of the nonprofit sponsorships for Sprint. And so worked with local charities, I worked with the different civic organizations, so the orchestra, the theater. And so I was very popular because I had access to a lot of tickets for different things. But yeah, so, and I also helped with the United Way campaign for Sprint. We raise over $1 million a year with that project. And then also I ran a food drive for Sprint. So I loved that because I just felt like no matter what Sprint did in the world, how the business was doing, I knew I was always doing something good, giving back to the community. And so that was a really fun job that gave me some good skills that I've used throughout my career. And then as Sprint was going through multiple rounds of layoffs, I was reorganized into an internal comms role. And that's where I started realizing, I can make a big difference with employees and helping them understand what is happening. Why are all these changes? Because I was surrounded by people who had anxiety and stress because Sprint at the time was going through so many changes. That was pre-merger. And so I started to see the power of internal comms. And from there, through networking, and I was offered a position in Oklahoma at an oil and gas company, also in an internal comms role. And that's where I landed in a change communication role. The company had acquired a business and there were IT programs. I supported the IT team. I did IT communications. And I got pulled into a middle of the night meeting where nobody would tell me what it was about. And it turns out the large consulting firm they had hired to do the change management piece for that had failed on the comms plan. My bosses were unhappy with what they had done. And so we had 2 weeks to do what the consulting firm had 6 months to do, to pull together a strategic communication plan for 75 plus IT projects that were going to happen due to this acquisition. And so that was my first taste of change communication and change management. And that's where I really found, it's like, I loved that. I traveled quite a bit for a year working with the different project managers and creating strategic plans and just making sure that their messaging was helping employees understand what they needed to do and what they needed to accomplish for those changes to be a success. And then that led to me getting recruited to this role in Denver where they were going through multiple acquisitions because we acquired 40 while I was there and they had already acquired quite a few before I joined the company. So they had a lot of change communication needs.
Okay, Lynn, I'm going to need to pause you for a hot second. So I had actually never heard of the term change communications until you. I saw you talking about it on LinkedIn and then you and I connected and you talked about it. And I think I remember asking you, what is change communications? I mean, I could figure out to some degree, but I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about that since you've helped, a lot of companies navigate change. What are some of the common pitfalls that you're seeing? I mean, you just talked about a few, but what are some of the common pitfalls that you keep seeing companies running into with change comms?
Well, I think the biggest thing with change comms right now is there is so much change that's happening. And the easiest way to define change comms, it's communication around an event that has a beginning, middle, and end. A change it's finite. It doesn't go on forever, and it shouldn't go on forever, I guess, is what I should say. Some companies, it seems like that it's constant. But, so that's the biggest thing with change is helping people. You're not trying to get them to be excited about the change. You're not trying to get them to be happy about the change. You're trying to get them to accept the change and be ready to do whatever needs to be done for the change to be successful. I think a lot of companies go into change thinking that this is going to be the best thing ever. And a lot of project teams, because they are so ingrained in that change, they think it's the best thing ever. They've been part of the decision making. They want people to be excited about this thing that's happening. And often it's the best we can do is just get people say, okay, fine, I'll do what you need me to do. But, with change, with change communication, and the difference between an internal communications role is that, internal comms, you're talking about culture, you're talking about ongoing things that you have a consistent cadence. You have, people know the newsletter is going to come out every Thursday. So you have things that you do that are consistent and that they're focused on getting people all kind of rowing in the same direction as far as what the company is trying to accomplish. The difference with change comms is that you're really you're focused on that single project and you're trying to get people to say, okay, I can take these steps that you need me to take to help make this change successful, and just so that they're informed and they're aware of what's happening with that change.
I think that and Lynn knows this, not everybody knows this. So I have my ProSci change management certification. So I think the distinction you made there, and I don't think you could talk to this too much, actually, is the difference between being happy about the change versus acceptance of the change. And this whole notion of this isn't necessarily, there are other things from a communication standpoint internally that you probably make a distinction that are really about the benefit and joy of being part of a culture, but change, the distinction is different. And so do you mind, as even a highlight of this, giving a high point of that Venn diagram? Because you did a beautiful job of illustrating that on LinkedIn. And I will, for folks listening, I will put a link to that in the show notes of this episode, because we had a new hire at our company. And as I'm onboarding her, I was explaining the difference between change management, change comms, internal comms. And then it just so happens that Lynn the next day puts out this Venn diagram, and I forwarded it to her and I go, here, don't listen to Brent and waving his hands, go see it from the expert. And this is when she was working on getting you some emails. So it was perfect entree to get to know Lynn. But do you mind illustrating a little bit of that distinction between joy and acceptance? To me is something that I think resonated with me in particular.
Well, that's, when we are doing work, we want people to be excited about it. We want them to be as excited about it as we are, because, I can geek out about comms. That's why I love talking on podcasts like this, because I get to talk about things that I love and that I think are important for businesses to be successful. But I do a lot of IT change. And when you're implementing you're implementing SAP, most likely people are not going to wake up and go to work and be like, I get to work on SAP today. I'm so excited. I can't wait to do my 37 character login. And then I have to authenticate. And then I have to figure out the poorly translated German. It's like SAP is not something that people necessarily get excited about. And so that's, I think, with change, you have to really look at it. You have to put yourself in the seat of the person who is being asked to change. How much is this going to change the way they work? Is it going to make their job more complicated? Sometimes new software does. Sometimes an acquisition, it's going to change who they report to, and it's going to change maybe some processes that they are used to. And so it's really about, we just want them to know what's happening. And we want them to be able to do what they need to do in order for that change to be successful. And a lot of times that is just saying, fine, I accept that this is happening. I have neutral feelings, or, I still am going to hate it, but I accept it and I will do what needs to be done. And so that's really where that change comms piece, internal comms, you're really trying to go after hearts and minds. You are trying to get them to buy into the culture of the company and be excited about, here's what we can accomplish if we do all of the things that we need to do. Change is really about, I just want to make it through this period of time. And at the end, we're successful. I may have to do things differently, but at least I'm able to continue doing my job in the way it needs to be done. So yeah, this Venn diagram that I put together, I actually presented a week ago with the IBC North Carolina chapter, invited me to come speak on the difference between change and internal comms. And as I was building that presentation, I started thinking about it. I'm like, how do I explain to people the difference and really show them, because there are a lot of overlap in between change communication, internal communication, and even change management. And there's a lot of misunderstanding, especially between change communication and change management. A lot of people kind of bundle that into the same place. It's change communication is change management. And I always have to say, no, I don't want to be a change manager. There's a lot more that happens when you're a change manager than just communication. Communication is a very important part of change management, but it is not all of change management. And so I just started playing around with this Venn diagram that ultimately, for all three of those areas of expertise, change communication, internal comms, and change management, the thing that combines that all three are working toward is behavior change. from a change communicator standpoint, you're wanting that person to do the thing that you need them to do for this new software rollout to happen, or from the culture change, you want them to live this culture. Change management, they're doing training, they are doing comms, they're working with leaders to help them understand what's happening and how they can support the change. And so they're working toward a behavior change. And then internal comms, even though their work is ongoing, it is consistent messaging, there's that cadence, we're still trying to change behavior because we're trying to get everybody rowing in that same direction, working toward that same goal of achieving the vision of the company.
Yeah, no, even though, like you said, a change is finite, there is still that reinforcement. So internal comms plays an important role in that reinforcement, right?
Well, and internal comms plays a big role in making a company change ready. I think now with the amount of change that is happening in the world and how many changes are happening in a company in a year, the rate of change has just accelerated in the last 10 years or so. And so internal comms needs to start looking at how do we keep people prepared for change. And in my mind, that is really talking about what's our vision? What are we trying to accomplish? What are our values? And so you're reminding people, this is how we operate as a company. This is what we're trying to accomplish. And so if people understand and are living the values of the company and working toward that vision, and they know what the mission of the company is, that they're coming in every day, what the company does, then when you have a change, they know that the leaders have made this decision because it's in alignment with their values. It's working toward achieving that vision. So it's all very interconnected, but there are very specific differences in each of those areas of expertise.
Yeah, that was a great visual. I'm so glad we're going to be able to post that, Brent. And I was going to ask you about the messaging, but you really covered a lot of that. So I think I'll pivot just a bit, Lynn, because I love topics like this. I should say I have a love-hate relationship with them, right? Because I know how important they are. And they also give me all this PTSD of this 18, 20 years I had in corporate, trying to get executives to understand that there's a right way to announce change and things like that. And I do still hear about that being a problem, in that we still have a lot of what I would call in kind of the spray and pray going on with, I talk about my frustration. That was sort of my number one frustration, right? I would always, I'd be working in a facility apart from headquarters. Headquarters would send out the stone tablets with, here's the change. And it would all be designed for, I worked for a pharma company where the headquarters was in New Jersey. Everybody's in white collars, driving their nice sales cars. But in Kansas City here, I was trying to run a manufacturing plant where people were punching and clapping. It was a much different kind of workforce, and yet the vernacular was different. It was so hard for me to get my line employees to understand what was coming down. And so let me just ask it this way: is spray and pray getting any better, or are we still making the same mistakes we've made for eons?
I think people are more aware that spray and pray does not work. Has it stopped? No.
Darn. We keep trying.
But I do think that, especially you mentioned frontline employees, I think people are a lot more serious now and about reaching the frontline. They're understanding that 10, 20 years ago, a lot of leaders would say, oh, they don't really matter. They don't care. They're just here to collect a paycheck. And now I think with a lot of research that has been done and just awareness around, and I think the pandemic made this obvious, is that they're a critical part of the business, which you'd think people would have recognized that because they make the product. They're the reason why the business still exists, essentially, because they are doing the work to create the product, to get it out to the public to sell. So why we didn't connect that before it's surprising, but now people have realized that. And so I think that we are taking it more seriously. We're looking at those stakeholder groups and understanding what motivates them, what's important to them, and how to help them get through a change and understand what they're being asked to do. Again, it's all very basic. It really doesn't matter who the stakeholder group is. It all is about understanding who they are, what motivates them, what could happen that could derail the project because of that stakeholder group. But, ultimately we are trying to get them to change behaviors. And so as change communicators, understanding that at the beginning of the project is critical to the success of that. But in tailoring, we also have a lot more tools that we can use to reach employees. Mobile devices have changed how we can communicate. There's obviously some sticky things that we can get into around asking people to use mobile devices for a corporate or a business purpose, but it's getting easier to communicate them. But I think the biggest thing is we need to be educating that middle management. How do you communicate? How do you help the change? How do you help you lead those teams? I just saw there was a research study, and I can't remember who put this out, but I was just seeing is that a lot of frontline employees, they don't know who the CEO of your company is. And so a message from the CEO of the company is probably not going to hit like you want it to. They look at the mill manager or the manufacturer, or their line manager even as the person who is kind of the know-all of what's happening within the company. And so if we're not looking at those stakeholder groups and really arming them with the information that they need and training them and how to communicate, I know a lot of us rely on the cascade. I feel like I'm going all over the place with this, but we need to be, that's where, when I go into a new change project with a client, doing a stakeholder analysis is so important up front so that we can start thinking through who are our real audiences and what do each of those audiences need to do in order for this change to be successful.
Well, yeah, I think you've hit on more than just the audiences, but also who needs to vocalize what thing, right? Because in ProSci, you made the distinction between company leadership versus middle management. One of the tenets of ProSci would say, the company leadership's really good about communicating what's in it for the company. Like you were talking about internal comms, preparing the organization for the change, like setting leadership, setting the vision, those kinds of things. And then they'll often point to within the ProSci model, they'll say, the manager is the best person to communicate what's in it for you, like what's in it for me personally, to get you to that point of acceptance. That fine, I guess I'll do it because I like Bobby as my manager, Tina as my manager, right? And I trust them. That relationship is super important in that regard.
Absolutely. And one of the things that when I do a stakeholder analysis, I have a grid that I use and I have the characteristics of each stakeholder group. And I encourage my clients to really not look at, employees. Okay, we all know employees are probably going to be your audience, but I want to know, does the finance team are they a specific stakeholder group? And is there a subset of the finance group that we really need to look at in this change? And so when I go through, I try to dig deep and get them to segment those stakeholders as specifically as we can. And then looking at desired behaviors again. So looking at each of those groups. And I've had an example where I was in one of these meetings and I said, we were talking about a finance change, and one of the project managers is like, oh, Doris in, this location, she doesn't like to use a computer. She has everything written down in notepads. And this was a major technology change that was going to change her world in a big way. and I said, well, what happens if she won't change? And that is something we had a really long discussion about and it's like, what happens if, she doesn't come to work tomorrow? Where are her notebooks? How are we going to get that information from a notebook into the system that we're asking her to use? And so digging is a communicator. And I get some pushback from change managers when I say I need to do a stakeholder analysis, because change managers will say, no, that's my job. But I feel like I have, as a communicator and especially if you're in the company, you have a view of the company that no one else has. Communicators know everything that's going on. We know all the secrets. We know what's happening. We know it's coming. And so we have this view of what could go wrong or what could conflict with the change that we're being asked to make. And so this stakeholder analysis, looking at the different groups, the characteristics of those groups, who do they listen to, who do they trust, the desired behaviors, what specifically do we need them to do? And then the thing that I found has been really good to ask the project managers that I've worked with is, who does this group have influence on the success of the project? And I have them rank it from 1 to 3. Are they influential? And then the other one is, how important is this group to the success of the project, ranking 1 to 3? And you could have So, one group that's super influential, but they're not really that important to the success of the project. And so that when I started adding that into the conversations that I have around change with project managers, that's when I really started getting good information and information that we could then look at and say, okay, we need to communicate with this specific group at this time because they have influence. And so giving them the tools to cascade messages or be a part of a town hall or something like that, then it gives us this bird's eye view of everybody who needs to be touched along the way.
Yeah, it's a great discussion. And I want to pass the baton to Julie, but just one thing that you mentioned that I want to pull out was you talked about the importance of middle managers in all of this. And that's so cool because I think that's based in research, right? I know when we used to do, the famous yearly HR employee survey, we would always ask, how do you want to be communicated with? And number one answer, my own manager, not the CEO, not somebody under me. I want to hear it from my own manager. And so it's based in research, actually, that we know that this is how employees want to be communicated with. So glad that you pointed that out.
Yeah. And I do a lot of communication audits. And one of the things we always hear from the middle managers is, I don't know how to cascade information.
Yeah,
I don't know how
right.
to communicate. And so one of my recommendations when I do a communication audit is always, let's train them. Yeah. Let's teach them how to be communicators and then make it easier, create tools that make it easy for them to cascade that information.
We're not training the group that people want to hear from.
Yes.
So there's the disconnect. So anyway, I'll stop.
That's so good. And this is where I can really see a difference between my nonprofit world and y'all's corporate world. So a lot of nonprofit teams are really small. So what I end up doing is having to coach leaders to say, your small team needs to hear from you because you are managing so many people. So it's fascinating that the research shows that in larger teams and corporations, they want to hear from their manager. That makes sense. Lynn, here's my question I have for you as you were talking. I kept wondering, okay, does each of these companies that she works with, are there internal comms people? Like when you go in to work with a company, is there an internal comms person? Is there a change comms person or change management person who is like, okay, I guess we have to work with this Lynn lady? Or are they just thrilled to have you? Or are organizations going, we don't even have internal comms. So like, they don't even understand your value. Like how much of your time is spent? I kind of have two questions here. How much of your time is spent convincing the people you have to actually work with why you're valuable? And how much of your time is spent really partnering with the internal comms person? Because I could see an internal comms person just saying hallelujah about the fact that you're there to help.
And that's most of my clients. That's the situation is they do have an internal comms team. But, anybody who's ever worked in internal comms teams knows that the budgets aren't there. And so often we're very understaffed and trying to do it all. And one of the things that, and I'm talking as a former corporate internal comms person, we're bad at saying no. And so we're taking on projects that probably we shouldn't be a part of, but we're good at solving problems. We're good at we like helping people. And so we're kind of targets for taking on too much. And so I often am brought in when a company is going through a fairly significant change, like an acquisition or a merger or a large scale technology change. And so that's where I come in and I see myself as kind of the middle person in between the internal comms team and the change team. Because the companies that I work with normally when they're going through a large scale change like that, they do have a large consulting firm that comes in and brings their whole team and their processes and their templates. But they normally, the communications team starts to realize what that large consulting firm has brought is not tailored enough for their organization. And so I'm able to come in and work with the internal comms team to learn what channels they have available to them and how they operate and what they say about culture, how they talk. And then I can go into the change project and attend the meetings and kind of I'll have that bird's eye view of what's happening within the company, and I can bring it back to the internal comms team to help them know you need to be watching out for this, or we've got a major milestone on this date. What else is going on during that day that we need to be, or during that time frame that we need to work around or be aware of? And so I kind of play that intermediary role where I am filling a gap that because the internal comms team doesn't have time to sit on 3, 4, 5, however many meetings a week. And that's where I can come in and kind of help them expand their team's capabilities and keep them in the loop, but not taking them away from the work that's also really important around the executive communication and the ongoing messages that the company needs to continue for it to be successful.
Okay, and can I have a quick follow-up no dumb question segment where when you come in to do this job,
Yeah, I love
segment.
this.
No dumb questions?
See what Julie's saying already?
Yeah, I see what she's bringing to the table.
In fact, I had one earlier. You said SAPs,
Oh, yeah.
and I
SAP.
thought I don't know what that is. So
Oh, geez.
One of the
Not in
you're
the
lucky.
nonprofit
You're lucky.
okay, good.
Yeah.
It's one of the largest software companies in the world.
Oh, okay, good. I don't know about that, which I'm okay with. My no dumb question is when you are actually executing on a plan within a company, doing this change comms, are you sending emails? Are you prepping leaders with talking points? Are you writing intranet questions? Just because I'm thinking about someone listening who might trying to figure out if this is something they would want to do, it's helpful to know what the actual tasks look like each day, even though, as we all know, communications people are not just order takers and we're not just executors, we're strategic thinkers, but it's always helpful to know what does the actual levers pulled look like when you're doing that job.
Yeah, it is. It's doing all the things a lot of times. I do sit in the meetings. I help with strategy. I provide counsel and, what should we be saying at this point in the change? But then, yes, I write emails. I have created posters. I work with I work very closely, usually with the internal comms teams because they own the channels normally, and so it's really trying to find ways. One of the things with change communication, you don't want to bombard people with so much information, and so we try to use the channels that are available to us as much as we possibly can, so that people know it's from a trusted source. And then they're not getting 37 emails about this change. It's wrapped up into where they know where to go to get the information that they need about the change because we're using the channels that they're used to.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah,
Answered my question.
Yeah, that's great. With all of this talk of change, you alluded to this earlier, Lynn, about you were working in these corporate roles, had seen a point where you were at a director leadership level within an organization working on internal comms, and then you decided to personally make a change and go out on your own, right? Mm-hmm. And with our focus on professional development, we haven't talked to a lot of self-employed or small business owners as part of this show. When you're talking with other small business owners or self-employed folks, and they're thinking of, or even folks that are thinking about striking out on their own, right? I think Julie had alluded earlier to the fact that the introduction to the consultants group, right? So the communications consultant group. When you have those conversations, are there any must-dos or avoid at all costs? What are kind of your first points of information that you provide those folks that are thinking about it or new to hanging their own shingle?
The key is the more people you know, the more successful you're going to be at bringing in business. And there's other ways to do it, I suppose. But for me, my business has been almost 100% referral or through networking. I market myself on LinkedIn, but I make a point of meeting new people every week and being involved in organizations that allow me to meet people. Before we started, we were talking about IABC. I am a I'm a walking billboard for IABC. I joined IABC right out of college. I knew that was the organization because I think we tried to get a student chapter of IABC going at KU and unsuccessfully, but it gave me a taste of what IABC offered compared to some other professional development organizations. And so I joined IABC right away, started volunteering right away. And like any good volunteer-led organization, they realize a sucker when they see one. And so within a couple of years, I was president of the Kansas City chapter. From there, I was invited to be a part of the Southern Region Board for IABC, which at the time was kind of the bottom half of the United States. And so I was chair within, I think, 2 years of that. I was chair of that group. And so IABC has played a key role throughout my career. And so that was through my corporate years. And then when I left the corporate world, I actually did take a break from IABC for a little while. But once I realized having my own business and becoming a consultant was the direction I wanted to head. The first thing I did was rejoin IABC, and I volunteered to be a part of the Colorado chapter board. And I jumped right back in. It was like I had never left. Old friends that I had who I hadn't talked to for several years, they were open to meeting with me as I was exploring, do I want to try to get a real job or do I want to try to start my own business? And so I just had lots of conversations through that. And, IABC is a central figure in my life and my career and the success of my business now, because I can trace pretty much every job I've ever had and every client I've had to IABC. I currently have a client where I've known him. I met him at the Leadership Institute in probably 2002, just a friend. We connected through communication. We joke that anytime we talk, we solve all of the world's communications problems. And we just make an effort every once in a while. We connect. And I joked with him about, you need to hire me. I'm a consultant now. You need to bring me on. And he'd always say, no, the rules of our company won't let me. Well, I got a call from him a couple months ago, and I'm now doing some consulting work for them. So it's building those relationships. I don't go into meeting somebody thinking, oh, they're going to hire me, but I go into those conversations with curiosity. I want to learn about them. I want to hear about their problems. And I give away a lot of information freely because I'm passionate about this stuff. I love talking about change. I love talking about communication. And so for me, just helping people out has been a great marketing tool and giving them information. That's why I've started speaking, because I want to help our profession be better. And I feel like the things that I know, the things I've learned, packaging them, putting them into a presentation and sharing that information with other people, that's what I can do to give back to our profession and hopefully make it better and help people make that jump from being an order taker and a tactical person to becoming a strategic thinker and really making a difference within the company. And so my advice to come back to that is to get to know people, talk to people, be able to tell them what you do and what, be very clear about the kind of work that you do and the kind of work you want to do. Because if you can tell somebody what you do in a very succinct way, they'll remember that. And when they're talking to somebody else who says, oh, I need this, I've got this problem at work we're trying to solve, they'll be like, oh, I know somebody who can help you. You should talk to them.
And for anyone listening who doesn't know what IABC is, that stands for the International Association of Business Communicators. All of us on this podcast are members, and we highly recommend it.
Yeah, yes. For sure. Definitely. Members.
Unsponsored post. But.
Yes. Members and sometimes more than members in many ways. Lynn, you've been so generous with your time. Thank you. As we move into our last 3 or 4 questions, this is cool because I get to ask you one that I did not know about you. So this is super cool. But I understand you are a collegiate rower. Do I have that you rowed crew? Is that the right way to say it?
I was on the rowing team. We called it Kansas Crew at the time. It was the club team. But yeah, I'm tall. And so I was walking across campus one day and these very athletic people came up to me and they're like, we need you to join the rowing team. And
what a great recruiting tool.
I was a high school athlete. I've been an athlete my whole life. And so my freshman year, I'd had shoulder surgery because of some softball injuries and took a year off. And I was bored. I'm one of those people that fills every moment of my day.
Well, that's super impressive. I don't know much about rowers, except I do know that they have to be. I think most of the practices are like 5:30 in the morning or some ungodly hour.
It's very, very early, and I'm one of my proudest moments. I'm the 1993 Kansas State indoor rowing champion. So I did get an invite to
awesome.
Little pre-Olympic camp through that. But yeah, rowing was a big part of my college career. And actually my business name Swing that's a rowing term. It's a swing is that moment when a boat it feels like it's gliding across the water because everybody in the boat is rowing at the same pace, pulling at the same time. And so I felt like that was just a great representation of what I'm trying to do with my clients is help them.
You have ESP because I was going to ask you, are there things that kind of resonate or life philosophies or business philosophies? And so, wow, what a great way to couch that.
Yeah. So when I was trying to figure out what to name my business, when that came to me, I was like, that's it. I couldn't think of anything better.
It's perfect.
Julie, you want to ask this? I'm going to skip the cat question just for to Matt's point about being gracious with your time. But what I think we could ask you is this trends or shit. Because, and Julie, I'll let you ask it, is because you have referenced so much macro change that's going on, Lynn, I think it would be like, even within our industry, what changes within our industry around communications have you both excited and concerned right now? Is I think the intent of the question. There, you just want me to ask it, Julie? Okay.
That's great. I think you just crushed it.
Okay. Well, all right. And then you can ask whatever you like, Julie, if there's anything else you want to ask. But I think I'm going to skip the cat question for you've been just so generous with your time. But you have referenced this a number of times throughout the conversation, Lynn, about this notion of we're all dealing with so much change. And even within our field or industry of communicate, whether it be communications or marketing, there's all this discussion. Within your Venn diagram, we're having to now factor in change management, where maybe that wasn't a discipline 15 years ago. Even more recently, we have artificial intelligence that all of us are trying to realize. I mean, Julie's sending me pictures of her with golden retrievers and bacon.
Yes,
that we're getting with, which we're gonna have to unpack that, Julie, at some point. But what trends or shifts even in our industry have you both kind of excited, and you can be ambivalent about it. You can be excited and concerned, but excited and concerned.
Well, I think, something I'm excited about is what AI is going to do for our industry. I know there's a lot of people who are concerned about that. The more I use AI in my day-to-day work, the more I'm realizing it's giving me the ability to be more strategic. It's giving me the ability to provide my clients with more because I am freeing myself up from that mundane stuff that we all have to do, getting the first draft written. Even if I have an idea that would normally take me, I look at AI as that, my cubicle mate. It's that person that if I have an idea, I just want to talk through it with somebody and say, is this anything? Can I make this something? And so I riff with my chat GPT all day long. I'll have an idea and I'm like, what do you think about this? And just have it quickly get me to the point where yes, I want to move forward with this. I think this is a good idea. Or no, I'm ready to move on to something else. And so I really feel like AI it's going to change how we work. There's no doubt about that. But I think that there's some really exciting things that we're going to be able to do as internal and change communicators with AI. But I also think that communications professionals are kind of not responsible, but we should be looking at how can we help our audiences use AI and understand what AI is there for, because a lot of companies are rolling out AI tools, but there's not a lot of change management and education around those tools. They're just saying, oh, here's Copilot, you can use that now. And I look at AI in the way that I look at the rise of the SharePoint intranet from 20 years ago, when we all first started hearing this thing called SharePoint. It was like, oh, here's our new intranet. And I've done a couple things on LinkedIn that probably will never get me hired by Microsoft, but I'm okay with that because
I think they have bigger concerns with the hack recently, but that's coming from me. So I'll never get hired by Microsoft with you.
But I look at, we as communications professionals, we kind of deferred to IT at that time when intranets were coming out. And we said, this isn't our thing. You're the technical people, what's best. And we didn't go into those conversations with, here's what we need in order to communicate effectively with our employees, with the comms folks. And so, or with the employees. So we deferred to them and we let them say, this is the tool you are going to use. And then we had to kind of come back and make it work. And now 25 years later, we're still, a lot of communications professionals are still dealing with SharePoint intranets that aren't effective. People can't find things. There's a lot of challenges with those tools. I see AI in the same way. If we defer to IT and the technical people, in how we use AI in an organization, there's going to be problems in 20 years because we haven't had a say in how AI is used and how we teach people within the organization how to use AI. So I could talk about this for a day, but I really feel like communications professionals need to be more than just managing the channels. It's like we need to be saying that these are the channels that we need. Here are the tools that will help us be effective. And there's so much research right now on different channels and how to use them and why we should be investing in channels that are actually built for communication as opposed to file sharing channels. So we need to understand the technology. We don't have to be experts in it, but we need to be able to communicate why that technology is important and how we use it, and not be deferring to somebody who has an IT background. They should be part of the conversation, but it should be a joint conversation, and they should not be the final decision makers, in my opinion.
Yeah, that resonates so well with me. I know, and this isn't an ad for Workshop. I know you've done some work with Workshop in the past, but I'm seeing a chart that they had because each of those channels are used differently and by different people in different generations. At this point in time, we have 5 generations that are in the workforce right now. And they did a Reagan presentation not too long ago, I know, where it broke down what channels were being used by what generations and in what way. And it was super cool to see. It was very succinct, very clear. And if we had that kind of instruction to be able to go back with something like AI would be really profound.
Yeah, I think that generational communication, that's so fascinating too at the IABC World Conference, hearing all of the sessions on the different generations and being able to communicate across the generations and understand what motivates each of them. It's fascinating stuff. And as communicators, it's so important that we're keeping that top of mind and reaching them where they're at.
Yep.
And so it sometimes gives us more work to do, but it's more effective if we can say this group prefers this kind of messaging and another group, so we can tailor more. And having the right tools allows us to do that. And AI can help us do those things by building personas and running messages through different personas to say, oh, Gen Z is going to hate this because of X, Y, and Z. And your Gen Xers are going to be like, that's fine. That's a great message. That's all we needed. So yeah, we need to understand technology as communications professionals.
I also hear you re-emphasizing the point that communications is a strategic function of an organization, which is something I always say. So if there's going to be a decision like this around technology, it shouldn't just be the IT people making the decision. You want your communicator in the room at that table speaking into it.
Yeah, the earlier you can get a communications professional involved, especially in a change, anything that's affecting the organization, we're going to be able to add a lot more value if we are at the table and we understand what's happening.
Lynn, thank you so much. You were so generous with your time today. This is great. We covered all the bases, I think, that we wanted to cover, maybe with the exception of cats, but hey, that's true.
You're making me sound like a crazy cat lady, which I kind of am.
Right.
But
The cat thing was mine. So Lynn and Lynn and I connect about once a month, and like clockwork, whenever we connect via Zoom, her cat is all on her keyboard and in the
I think I've seen this too. Mm-hmm.
In the microphone. So, and she's fought. So the cat thing was mine. But as Matt said, you've probably given people a lot to think about with respect to change in their lives, change in their work career, and change management and change communications. Is there anything else you'd like to mention that we may have missed in this discussion? When's your book coming out? I know you don't have one. But if somebody, I'm planting the seed of an idea of somebody that should be writing a book. Anything you'd like to mention that we may have missed? The book's not a real thing, people. It should be.
If you're a ghostwriter and would like to talk to me about my book, reach out. No, I think we've covered so much. I'm presenting at a few conferences. I don't have any of that information in front of me right now, but just keep an eye. Follow me on LinkedIn. That's where I post a lot of the information that I share. And when I'm presenting, I always make sure to cover that in my LinkedIn posts. So
LinkedIn's how I found you, Lynn.
yes.
I don't remember when I started following you, but I followed you. And then I found out you were speaking at the Kansas City IABC meeting. And
I like
Here we go.
I like to post niche memes about internal comms. That's kind of become my thing. So
they're highly entertaining.
Definitely a good follow.
Yes. Lynn's an amazing follow on LinkedIn. So we'll make sure to include Lynn's LinkedIn profile in the show notes. And again, there are two things I know we've taken away from this. One has been comms is a strategic function. And two, also go where people are at. And Lynn does love to get out and go where you all are at. So I will make sure to include some of her greatest hits with respect to where she will be around the country if you want to visit with her. So we'll include those in the show notes as well. So we've so enjoyed the conversation. You and I get to do this again, I think, next week.
Next week, yeah.
But for everyone else, we've so enjoyed the conversation. I know our listeners will enjoy it. Thanks, Lynn, for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Lynn.
If you found value in today's episode, check us out on our website, CultivatedMarketer.com. You'll also be able to subscribe to us, rate us, and leave us a comment on your favorite podcast platform, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher. Remember, a garden of opportunity grows with Cultivated Marketer.